Welcome to the Cocktail Guru podcast,
a show about food, drink, and entertainment,
with a tight focus on the good life,
and all things delicious, luxurious, and fun.
I'm Jonathan Pogash, bartender, author, TV personality, and founder of the Cocktail Guru.
And I'm Jeffrey Pogash, wine and spirits professional, author, insatiable collector of culinary ephemera, and so people tell me, an engaging raconteur.
And my dad. Good afternoon, Father.
Good afternoon, Jonathan. How are you?
I'm good.
It's another beautiful day in the suburbs
Another
here.
day, another cocktail, another background. You've got a different background you're trying out.
Yes, I do. This is our second season, brand new season.
Yeah.
We have a brand new subject that we are discussing today for the very first time, which I'm excited about, and we're giving our listeners
What are you drinking?
and our viewers a little hint. I'm drinking a double espresso martini here, which is a bit of a hint about the next subject.
So you want to hear what's in my double espresso martini? So first of all, I have Van Gogh double espresso vodka.
Wow.
Which actually, all of these coffee products would not be around without the guests that we'll be bringing out, actually, or as popular. I also have, this is a local coffee syrup right here in South Dartmouth, Massachusetts. I love plugging local family-owned company. It's called Morning Glory Old-Fashioned Coffee Syrup. You should look them up. It's delicious. And coffee syrup is huge around here, Southeast Massachusetts,
And I have that in my refrigerator at all times.
I also added a little splash of port wine into my double espresso martini. It's really good.
Excellent. Great choice. Well, this gives our listeners and viewers a bit of a hint about our next guest, because this is a very special day for me, because the guest that we are about to introduce was responsible for changing my life, at least when it comes to this particular. Yeah. Wow. Oh, yeah. He changed my life when it came to my perception.
What about your kids? Did your kids
not my perception of my kids, my perception of something that's very important to all of us, that most of us cannot do without in the morning hours of the day, and that is coffee. The subject is not kids, coffee.
Okay, right.
Yes.
No, I thought I was talking about things that have changed your life.
Well, yes, your birth changed my life. And what's interesting, funny you should bring that up, because my meeting this particular guest came at about the same time that you were born.
Oh.
Yeah.
Isn't that sweet?
Yeah. So, I think it was the same year, as a matter of fact. So that makes it even more special because we're doing this episode together. Our guest is someone known and revered throughout the coffee industry. He received, and if you had any doubt, just the fact that he received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Specialty Coffee Association, which is really the Oscars of the coffee industry, should make you fully aware of how important this gentleman is.
He is the Tom Hanks of coffee, I would say.
Well, I might even go beyond that.
Oh.
But what's interesting is that when I started working in 1977, one of my major stops, I was trying to sell wine to different stores and restaurants throughout the United States. But one of my first stops and one of my favorite stops was Boston. So I used to spend a lot of time in an area called Cambridge and Harvard Square in particular. Why? Because it was a student hangout. It was a cool place. It was a hip place. It was a place where I could really relax from the stresses of having to deal with wine shop owners and restaurants. Although I loved working in the Boston market. It was one of my favorite places in the entire country. So as I was doing that, I encountered one day a place called the Coffee Connection. And the Coffee Connection was a shop, a cafe, where you could sit down, relax, and have wonderful coffee. What was life-changing during those Coffee Connection experiences was the fact that it wasn't just regular coffee that I was drinking. It was single varietal coffee, single origin coffee. I mean, an incredible array of finely crafted, finely roasted, and perfectly brewed coffee. This was something that I had rarely experienced, if ever. We can talk about a place that I did go to back in Berkeley, California, um, quite a while ago, and that was even before I met our next guest. But that's another subject for another time. So this experience with coffee started changing my life, and then a year or two after I discovered the Coffee Connection, a mutual friend of ours introduced me to our next guest. And that really changed my life. He happened to be the owner of the Coffee Connection. So we met, we got along quite well. And he was kind enough to invite me to his roasting facility and then arranged to organize a coffee cupping for me. And that's when I started tasting all kinds of exotic, what was then exotic and still exotic and wonderful coffees like Ethiopian coffee, Brazilian
Dad,
coffee, Costa Rican La Minita coffee, all kinds of wonderful
Dad,
things.
I hate
Yes.
I hate to cut you off with this soliloquy, but I really, really want to bring on our guest.
Well, I want to as well.
Okay,
But there's one more.
let's bring him on right after this. If you're into swag as much as we are, then look no further than our Cocktail Guru shop. The items in our store have been personally chosen with care by me, Jonathan, and my team of cocktail gurus. A water bottle with a stainless steel straw, we've got that. T-shirts, hoodies, snapback hats, signed copies of Mr. Boston Bartender's Guide, cocktail box kits, bar tools, more. Way more. You bet. We've even managed to create a onesie for that mocktail lover in your family. Head on over to shop.thecocktailguru.com and use code GURU22 for 10% off your first order. That's shop.thecocktailguru.com, 10% off with code GURU22. Cheers. Okay, we're back.
Great. There's one more thing I'm going to say before we bring on our guest, and that is that among his many achievements, he is responsible for creating a product that all of America knows well, and I would say probably the rest of the world as well. And that is a product that is, well, world renowned, called the Frappuccino. Our next
Wow.
Yeah, that's right. And our next guest is Mr. George Howell. George, welcome. I mean, I just can't go, I have to go on and on. I can't say enough about you, but we're going to have to let you speak and talk about what it is you are up to these days. Welcome, George.
Thank you. So a correction. Well, I have to say first, so when I changed your life with coffee, you essentially became woke.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
That's right.
Oh God.
That's
Yeah.
right. I became woke.
I've never heard my dad use that word before.
There's always a moment.
It irks me a little bit. It is irksome.
So in any case, I have to correct you on the Frappuccino, or at least give a full version of what that really entailed, right?
Sure. Sure.
There was, back in the early days, several years before we came out with Frappuccino, there were people writing about iced cappuccino,
Right.
and putting it in a granita machine, and serving it. And Ted Lingle, who was the director of the Specialty Coffee Association of America, did a test at the Los Angeles Olympics, which I think was in 1986 or 84, but somewhere in there. And he served that beverage, which was at that time, I believe, iced cappuccino. I was really, it struck me as being a real potential in terms of popularity. Later, I went to Seattle and visited various cafes there, and came upon the very same product being produced in a granita machine. It's a simple
Ah,
formula of
right.
very powerful coffee, really intense, milk, and sugar. That's it, right? Those are the three
Mhm.
things that went
Hmm.
into it. I came
Sure.
back and we created our own version of that with those three ingredients only. And Andrew Frank, my marketing guy, came up with the name Frappuccino. The minute he said it, we knew that was the name, right?
Now
Absolutely.
I have a
Yeah.
quick question, George. We always ask all of our guests when they come on, what is your desert island drink? And I think it
Oh,
seems that you're drinking it right now,
oh yeah.
possibly.
Black coffee. Black coffee.
Yep.
Black
Period.
coffee.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Finely crafted black coffee.
Yeah, truly.
Yes. Yes.
And then it can really be one from Kenya or Guatemala or whatever. It depends precisely on how finely crafted it is and how well
Now I
brewed
wanted
it
to go
is,
back
right?
to the I wanted to go back to the Frappuccino thing because the actual drink and the word
Yeah,
itself makes me think of the frappes that
yeah.
you'd have in
Well,
Greece.
that's what Andrew picked up on. That's exactly
Okay,
why he came up with the name Frappuccino, right?
right. I
And
love those. Oh my gosh! Whenever I've been to Greece a couple of times, but they're
uh,
so
well,
delicious.
that yeah, exactly,
Well,
But they use instant coffee, I think, right? They use like a Nescafe, if I'm
probably,
not mistaken. Yeah.
yeah,
I didn't even know that it was Greek, but I do know that the word frappe or frappe in
right.
French is a New England term, a term used throughout New England. When I was a kid going to camp,
Right.
we used to go out to restaurants and order
A
frappes.
frap with
When
coffee,
I
with coffee,
we,
ice cream, and coffee syrup and milk.
well, I don't know if
Exactly.
the ones we had coffee. I don't know,
But to
but we were in Maine, and everywhere we went there were frappes.
to just finish the story on Frappuccino, so when Starbucks bought the Coffee Connection in 1994, when we had approximately 23 cafes, they of course then purchased the Frappuccino along with that, right? So
Hmm.
they got the name, but there were two people apparently in LA doing their own beverage that they were creating with, and it had no name, that had cocoa mixed in with coffee, and that was
Mm.
done
Ah,
in a blender, not a
mm,
granita type machine, right? And so they named that Frappuccino, right? So it's very similar in texture to it, but it gave you the impression of being handmade. Of course, depends what you call that, because of course you're using a dust, it's a already
right.
it's a made product, right? That's going in.
And
It's an instant type coffee,
presumably
right?
presumably with throwing it in the blender as opposed to a granita machine, you're diluting it maybe a little bit more if it's in the
Not
blender. So
necessarily.
or no,
No, no,
no.
because they're using an extract, right?
Well,
That's been turned
what's
into a
important?
powder, and that's going in along with the cocoa.
I
But it's
see.
it's a very different flavor. I don't like it anywhere near as much. That's personal, right? But so, in any case, just to clarify that,
Oh, that's great.
yeah,
But what's important to me is not so much the formula
right.
as the name
The
itself.
name was great.
And you created the name. You and
Uh,
your company
Andrew
at the
Frank.
Coffee Connection. Andrew Frank created the
I
name.
I
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
believe in working with people who contribute, right?
Sure. Sure. That's very kind of you
Yeah,
to recognize him. Yes.
necessary.
Yes. Yeah.
And
So,
Dad, I think your interest in coffee began. Well, you've told this story before when you were in college and you made a trip to Panama. Is that right?
that's
Mm.
exactly right. I had a girlfriend from college who was
Whoa,
from
whoa,
the,
whoa, 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 whoa! You did not
and
have any girlfriends before
not,
Mom.
not your mother, a girlfriend who I
Uh,
was going to college with in Wisconsin, and she happened to be from she was born and raised in the Canal Zone in
mm,
Panama. So when we started going out, she invited me to visit her in at her parents' home in Panama, and her father was a very prominent man. He was the Episcopal priest for the Canal Zone. And because of that, he had many connections. And we were invited one day to lunch on a coffee plantation
Mm.
farm. And the owner, it was very gracious. It was a beautiful hacienda style home. And we had a wonderful lunch. And then after lunch, they served, of course, their own coffee. And that really was an eye opener. It was one of the greatest cups of coffee I had ever had. And that was long before I met George. But that peaked several years before I met George. But that really piqued my interest in the whole topic of coffee.
Interesting that you bring up Panama, because it's in
Yeah.
Panama that a new variety was discovered that was simply unknown in specialty coffee or any coffee.
Ah.
It had been brought over back in the early 1930s as something that would be more disease resistant, but people gave up on it because it was very low productivity. So, commercially, they didn't see how it would work. But later on, in a competition that Panama did, very similar to Cup of Excellence, the best of Panama, one farmer, La Esmeralda, basically picked this one variety, separated it from all the other varieties that they had, and presented that into the competition, and they floored the judges with this coffee.
Mm.
Completely different flavor note. And suddenly, the price of that coffee, I think in the first year, went over $100 a pound, as
Whoa.
it was bid
Whoa.
for around the world. And since then, prices have gone substantially higher than that. So you're talking already entering the world of wines for this kind of thing,
Oh my. So it's
right?
something I can't afford to drink anymore.
Uh,
No.
yeah, the very best, yeah. I mean, for La Esmeralda, I'm paying anywhere $50, $100 plus for
Wow.
the very finest,
Mm.
right, processed variety geisha,
Well,
right?
Dad, I have a guy, so I think I could probably get you. I'm just kidding. I do.
But the
I'm just kidding.
geisha variety, it's not the only one, but it is the most floral. It's
Well, I would love to
Mm.
taste
explosive in
that.
terms of the aromatics that it has.
Mm.
Uh,
And is Esmeralda the name of the varietal?
no, geisha
No.
is.
Oh, geisha is the
Yeah, and
varietal.
it's
Okay.
frequently spelled just like from Japan with an I in
Mm-hmm.
it. Although
Mm-hmm.
I prefer the actual Ethiopian name, because that's where it originally came from, Ethiopia, the
Oh,
birthplace
aha.
of Arabica coffee, right?
Yes.
From an area called Geisha without an I, Gesha, right?
Well,
Ah,
mm-hmm.
So,
Ah, okay.
and I prefer
Well,
that. It's that way. It's not sexual. It's not anything. It's about the coffee.
right, right. Well, I guess shortly after I met you, or possibly even before, I had tasted some Ethiopian yirgacheffe, but I think
Yeah,
that was well after you and I first met. And
right.
I see that you have something called Ethiopian borboya as well.
Did.
Uh-huh.
Unfortunately, that sort of petered out a number of years
Mm.
ago. It arrived, and it had been tampered with before it came to us, and we could not even sell it.
what does that? What does that mean?
That on its way, somewhere in Ethiopia, it got mixed with other coffees,
Mm.
right?
Ooh.
And you could just tell. And that was that. I've never been able to get it again in terms of that kind of quality.
So they sold it as single origin or as whatever it was supposed to be, but then it had been mixed, so they were trying to knock it
Yeah,
off.
well, I don't know who they is. I don't
Oh,
know. I don't. I doubt whether it was Borboy itself, but it could have
well,
been.
it's the pirates.
That's
It's the
right.
pirates.
Exactly. I really, to this day, don't know exactly what happened, but I know that suddenly the availability of that coffee has just disappeared uh, for
But
me and for others. But
you still have
yeah, we
yeah,
still
go
have.
ahead,
Oh yeah,
please.
we still have great Ethiopians. Right
Oh
now,
yeah. Yeah.
it's a mill called Gaduba, which is very close to where
Mm.
the Borboya was. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but of course, yeah. So, and the Ethiopian that you tried was itself really radically floral compared to other coffees around the
Yes,
world.
very,
Right.
very much so.
Milder, but
Exactly.
more floral,
Very floral.
jasmine,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. Really
Yeah.
Mm.
surprising
Yeah.
to people. Uh,
Yeah.
And George, I want to talk about how you became interested in coffee.
Mm-hmm.
But before that, we're just going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
You got it.
We all know how hot the espresso martini is these days. Well, why not include a quality vodka to up your espresso martini game? Van Gogh Double Espresso Vodka, distilled 3 times with high-quality espresso beans and natural cane sugar, is all you need to add some liquid art to your repertoire. Follow at Van Gogh Vodka on Instagram and hashtag #GoCreate. Van Gogh Vodka is imported by 375 Park Ave Spirits, Louisville, Kentucky. Please enjoy responsibly. And we're back. George, I'm sure everyone would like to know. I definitely would like to know how did this interest in coffee come about?
Yeah, like some other people in the very beginning of specialty coffee, I didn't study business. I was studying history of art and philosophy. And I became very involved in the early 70s with artwork from an indigenous group in Mexico, and started exhibiting their art first on the West Coast, where I was living at the time, and then later I came to Boston to exhibit that art. But you're talking early 1970s, and the kind of, very frankly, racism that I ran into regarding that, and the insistence on looking at it as folklore. And something that belonged in your kid's bedroom as opposed to being considered seriously as an original piece. All of that was out the door, and even today, despite a lot of strides in the right direction, that still exists to some degree. But in any case, when I came to Boston, I was exhibiting to some degree, but what we noticed was that the coffee in Boston was dreadful. It really was like painted wood pellets ground into sawdust. And that's what it tasted like.
Just watered, flavorless, watered down.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then there was one place that was supposedly selling specialty with open barrels, showing you all the different beans that all looked pretty much alike with different names to them. And later on, when I decided to get into coffee, that the person selling that coffee came to our place to maybe sell us his coffee for us to roast, and basically said, "Hey, here's a Brazil, here's a Colombian, and then you get some Central Americans, and I can blend them every which way. And you got Jamaican Blue Mountain, you got Kenya, you got all these other coffees, because there's really no difference, right?" And so. But that's another story, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in essence, one, we really wanted great coffee. There wasn't any. So we had seen the success of specialty coffee in the Berkeley, San Francisco area where I was living in the early 70s with Beats and other cafes and roasteries there. And so we said, okay, we're going to create our own coffee place, right? Coffee Connection was born. My wife came up with that name. Instant saying, yeah, that's exactly the right name. And by putting up a cafe, and you saw that, Jeff, we were able to exhibit the art on the walls. So right in the middle of Harvard Square with all the university students and all the rest of it, this art was visible and played a really great role in terms of really bringing in funding to this indigenous group, and also recognition for their art.
And it was creating an experience for the guests coming
100%. That's exactly right. And so I've always mixed aesthetics from the music to the art and so on with the coffee to create an environment that is cultural, that invites people to relate with one another. I can't tell you how many people still to this day say, "Do you know we got married thanks to Coffee Connection?"
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's where they met. Yes. So, yeah, it was a student hangout. I met my wife at the library of the Sorbonne in Paris, and I'm sure a lot of couples met at the Coffee Connection.
Was the preparation of the coffee at Coffee Connection? I assume it was more unique than other basic coffee shops.
Yes.
Were you using state of the art espresso machines, and
no,
were you doing pour over?
No, not number one. There wasn't state of the art yet. back in the 70s. Really, it started with drip. We had an espresso machine, but I didn't really focus on espresso until much later on with Coffee Connection. So we served it, but without that focus that I would put on later. It was the drip, really, and French press. So one of the innovations the Coffee Connection did was, if we had 20 coffees for sale, beans, right? You could try any one of the 20 coffees on the spot with a French press, right? And the French press was great because it allowed you to brew very quickly individual cups for people who came in. So we had it in an urn for people who wanted to quickly get their coffee and go. And then we also had it in the French press for those who really wanted a treat and a heavier, richer beverage, right?
And for me, one of the unique elements of the Coffee Connection was the roasting. That's where I learned about city roast, full city roast, French roast, Italian roast. It's because of George that I know all of those things. And I fell in love with, I guess it was the full city roast, and thought the coffees roasted that way were just incredibly delicious and complex, showing all their full flavor without getting mucked up.
We gave up. We gave up on that
over
word,
roasting.
full city, because it was basically taken over by people who were roasting far darker than we were. And so today, really, we call it a light roast. And with George Howell coffee, we do, light, medium, and dark, right? But our darkest roast is nowhere near the kind of French roast that other places do, right?
So is it?
And you opened your first coffee shop in 2012, right?
No,
Under George Howell.
Well, wait a minute. It was around 2012. Sorry. We actually opened up an earlier one called Copa Cafe in Lexington Center in 2003, but that was a full-blown restaurant, which was way ahead of its time. We were serving small plates, right, and wine and so on. Women loved the small plates, and men absolutely could not handle it. It was very interesting.
I love myself a good small plate.
No, they wanted their big spaghetti plate or whatever it was. Lots of it in one thing.
So that restaurant did not focus on coffee.
Right.
Then.
And so then, it took a number of years of doing wholesale only for me to open up a cafe the way I wanted to.
And am I not mistaken in the fact that the longer you roast beans, the less caffeine there is in it?
Actually, that's a myth.
It's a myth.
Complete myth. Very little caffeine is roasted out of the coffee. One. Two, even if there is a little bit more caffeine that is withdrawn from each bean, the fact of the matter is that if you take a pound of light roast and a pound of French roast, you will see that the pound of French roast is almost double the size of the light roast, because so much of what's in each bean has been removed by that dark roast, right?
Okay.
If you were to continue roasting, you'd have cinders only, and it would weigh nothing at all, right? That's the progression that you're into here. So in essence,
I see.
There's a whole lot less caffeine maybe in every bean, but you're using that much
you're using more of it to
way more.
Add to it.
That's
right.
exactly
I see. That's very interesting. I didn't know that. So with lighter roasted coffee, you're using fewer beans in general, yielding the liquid.
That's right.
Versus usually utilizing more beans to yield the same amount of liquid.
Exactly right. They have, and what we get from that lighter roast are flavors that simply disappear as you get darker, because you add more and more caramel roasted flavors to what's in the core of the bean, which can be floral, which can have a number of notes that simply become more and more shaded into darkness.
Because in effect, you're burning the beans.
That's where you go. Right. When you get a French roast, if it's really fresh, what you'll see is that they're bleeding. The oils are bleeding through the broken cells to the surface, right? And they will they lose their flavor much more quickly than do lighter roasts.
Geez, there's so much education needed for folks, I think, with
Oh
coffee
yeah,
specifically, because it's such a natural thing to have every morning. And I'd say the majority of Americans have coffee, but they don't know what they're drinking, and
that's right.
people say, oh, well, I'm going to have a light roast because I don't want too much caffeine. It's the middle of the day.
Yeah,
And
that's a
then another
mistake.
person saying, right. And then another person saying,
Yeah,
oh, I'm going to have a dark roast because light roasts have more more caffeine than dark roast,
right. And by the way, dark roasters generally will
Well,
use the word, and Starbucks uses it all the time, is rich, right? Rich. And
yes, yes.
right,
Instead of
bold and
over
rich. Those are
roasted,
the
they
two
say, right?
words.
Yes.
A dark roast is very
Right.
aggressive when it's hot. You can taste it immediately, right? It's got that coffee flavor the
Yeah.
second you take it,
Yeah.
no matter how hot it is. To my mind, it's best when it's hot. And as it cools, to me, it becomes more just mucked up, not clear, right? And whereas a light roast can seem kind of mild when it's very hot, and it's as it's cooling that the flavors really develop. And it's only at about 135
Yeah.
degrees Fahrenheit that you get all the flavors. So it's more like a glass of wine that's opening.
And I remember you taught me that you can even wait until the
Hmm.
coffee turns cold and retaste it, and a really good,
Right.
well roasted coffee will be just as
Yes.
flavorful cold as
Ah,
it is when
that's
it's warm, or
interesting.
Well,
even more
now
so.
that's how to make great iced
Yeah.
coffee, by the way. You can go to Amazon or to our place, and I forget the name of the brewer, but it's basically like 99 rods that sit into a plastic pitcher, right? And you keep that in the freezer. So when you brew your hot coffee, you then put it
Mm.
in that jug. You drop these rods in that are frozen, and within a minute and a half, it's
Mm.
down to about 38 degrees from the
Oh,
200,
wow.
right? Immediately. And now you have an iced coffee that blows away anything you have ever tried as an iced
Right.
coffee.
Not
Period.
undiluted, no additional
Right.
dilution.
No extra dilution. Precisely right. Very different from what's popular now, the cold brew, which to me is very beer like,
Wow.
removes the terroir
Mm.
completely.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's a kind of signature beverage that is sold because it's supposedly less acidic because you're brewing it using only cold water. But
Yeah.
it's like saying you don't want an acidic strawberry or something. Without the acidity, the strawberry's deader than a doornail. you
Yeah. Exactly.
There's
There's
nothing
no
left with it.
body left without these.
This thing
Yeah.
that's missed,
Yeah.
the thing that's needed is
There's no
sweetness. As something
vibrancy.
gets riper,
Yeah.
it gets sweeter, which
Yeah.
balances the acidity. And that's where the pleasure comes from. It's the
Yeah.
delivery, right?
I have never been impressed. I've never been impressed with
Correct.
cold brew coffee. I know there's one subject that
Yes.
we must cover uh, during this episode, and that's the
Yeah,
Cup of
yeah. Right.
Excellence that you were involved in from 1994 to
Yeah.
1997 to 1999. Um, Focusing your efforts were
Right.
focused on Brazil
Right.
and Brazilian coffee. Can you tell us? And this was a United
Yeah, it was
Nations
a National
project as
Coffee
well.
Association that was in London and the United Nations that really developed this plan. And I was
Yeah.
hired by Brazil to be their quality consultant, and with the idea of really getting coffee to be out of the commodity world where farmers were just losing money year after year, many times because the price was often below the cost of production, right? So how did farmers who are quality driven, how could they get out of this really bad situation? At the end of that, I came up with the idea of creating an international competition, bringing in coffee roasters from around the world. A jury of about 20, 24 jurors that would come. The first set came in late 99, and they were from Japan, from Sweden, no, Norway rather, Italy, France, and then the United States as well, and Canada. And they came there for an entire week to taste the very best, carefully selected lots from farmers who entered into that. We had 300 contestants in the beginning. And that first competition, we reduced it down to 10 winners that got over 80 points scores. And we then auctioned the coffee, and that was the first internet coffee auction in the world, right? That went in. So it was the first competition in the world like that, and the first auction. And these were then roasters from around the world who bid for the green, unroasted coffee at that origin, right? And so they did achieve much higher prices, 30, 40% higher than the normal market price that a Brazilian coffee would have got. Over the years, they learned that by making the lots smaller, they can produce higher qualities and get higher prices, especially because specialty coffee was all about small roasters, not large ones. They couldn't afford to pay for really large amounts of coffee at $10 or whatever, where you're getting 10,000, 20,000 pounds. That's a massive expense. But when you whittle it down to 1,000 pounds or whatever, now you can pay $50 a pound, right? That kind of thing. So it really brought a lot of farmers to the attention of roasters around the world. They would go to Cup of Excellence, declare the winners at the end of that week, and then many people would then go visit those farms and establish relationships with them. So this was a huge opening to the coffee world, especially younger people starting to roast. And there's a book called God in a Cup, right, that was written about that, where three key roasters from Stumptown, Intelligentsia, and Counterculture leave Coffee Connection to visit those winning farms. And to this day, those companies are selling farms that won Cup of Excellence, right?
Yes.
Wow. Yeah.
And so this is spread.
And between your efforts in the 1970s
Right.
with the Coffee Connection and this Cup of Excellence project, which you were intimately involved with, we now have a
That's
coffee
the
revolution.
idea. What we need now, really, for the farmer's point of view, is less blends and more single farm, coffees, right? And that does require people actually having some curiosity to get out of the habit of adding milk and drinking it black. So I often invite people, before you put the milk in, just taste it black first. And
tough habit to kick.
Exactly right.
But that was Alfred Pete's fault.
I won't get into that.
Right? If I remember the story correctly.
From Pete's Coffee.
Because, yes, he decided to over roast his coffee because he knew Americans would
It's amazing
add lots
how
of
many
milk and
people
sugar to
love
the
Pete's
coffee.
to this day.
Yeah.
So
Oh yeah. With the last couple minutes that we have, George.
Yeah.
Speaking of books, you have are you working on a book?
I do want to do one. Absolutely.
You do. Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot I want to say. If you want quality coffee down the road, it's more than just commodity, and it's a real discovery to notice suddenly that you really like black coffee, right? That's people settle into their comfort zone with the lattes and so on. When I travel, when I get on the airplane, you think I'm drinking black coffee? Hell no, I'm putting milk in it because it's the only way I can drink it.
Well, that's good.
Right, of course.
That's good to know. So if it's crappy coffee, you put the milk in it without even.
Then it becomes a habit.
Well,
then it becomes a habit, a comfort.
You have to.
Right? And you don't change, right?
Yeah, you have bad coffee, you add milk.
But then you have the person
around it.
whose eyes suddenly open up, like you. They become woke. Sorry, I shouldn't use that word. It's not what its meaning is, but
Full circle.
Oh, but let's say,
Yes,
oh, I was
awakened. We should
awakened.
use that
Your
word, right?
your
Awakened.
coffee
Yes.
senses were awakened.
That's right. And yeah, so people do
Yes.
go. When I invite people to take some black coffee at home, they ask me if I put sugar in the coffee because it's so much sweeter than anything they
Yeah.
expected.
Ah,
Right.
yeah.
And by the way, when you
Right.
brew coffee,
Wow.
black coffee has no sugar, and yet it can taste very sweet, which still
Yes.
mystifies
Yes.
scientists as to what is producing that. It's clearly a
Hmm.
mix of more than 1,000 different molecular flavors
Hitting
that
your
go into
tongue.
it. It's the most
Yeah.
complex beverage known to humankind,
Yeah.
is my understanding, by a long
Wow.
shot.
Well, George, this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. I can't believe we were able to. I can't believe you were able to book George, Dad.
Oh, it's been years that I've been wanting to do this podcast, and as soon as we created the podcast, what did I say to you? I said, of course, we want to do spirits and cocktails, but
Oh,
I said the first thing I
before
want
you
to do
go,
outside of spirits and cocktails is
before you
coffee
go,
with George
I
Howell.
beg people to, when they've opened their bag, right, of quality coffee, and they brew their first amount, the rest they need to
Yes,
ziplock tight, and they should freeze it. They
right.
should freeze it.
Oh,
Unlike what so many
Yes,
specialty
freeze.
people and companies have said, don't freeze coffee. They don't know what they're talking about. And the world champion, the United States champion, has used frozen coffee to brew the espressos that won him that award. And so
huh.
has the world barista champion as well.
And
Totally
I'm assuming
frozen.
that's
And you don't need to warm it up or anything else. You literally
no.
take that frozen coffee, grind it. It will be a more even grind because it's more brittle, because the colder it is, the more brittle it is,
It shot.
right?
It probably shocks. It shocks the bean.
It's the brittleness, and
It's the
it's
brittleness. Oh, okay.
the way the grind
Huh.
then is more even, so you don't get under and over extracted beans.
Hmm.
You get more of an even brew from your coffee,
Interesting.
and it does it better, right? And you don't have to worry about smells from the freezer, for God's sake, or
Right,
condensation
right.
if you have it ziplocked, right? It's the only way to go, right?
Well, that's an awesome tip. Thank you so much again, George.
My pleasure.
Thank you, George. It's been an honor and a great
Anytime,
pleasure to
Jeff,
have you
John.
on. Thank
Good
you so
talking to
much.
you.
Tipple Time is brought to you in part by Monin and Van Gogh Double Espresso Vodka.
Hey everyone, it is yet again another segment of Tipple Time. Tipple Time is when I make you a cocktail and I talk about that cocktail with some of my favorite products. It's really simple, actually. Now, you've probably had an espresso martini, but have you had a hibiscus espresso martini? Oh my gosh. Guys, you could be very creative with a simple cocktail like an espresso martini, which is super hot these days, as you probably know. And we're sticking with this coffee theme and adding a little bit of a twist, somewhat seasonal, kind of all year round, actually. We're actually going to use this Monin hibiscus syrup. And Monin makes amazing, delectable, bold syrups that are great for the professional mixologist as well as the at-home mixologist. Really delicious in cocktails. So many different flavors. You should check out their website. We'll post that over here. And we're also using, I know and I love this product. I've used it for many, many years, the Van Gogh Double Espresso Vodka. It's bold and brilliant and really, it's a blank canvas when it comes to experimenting with Van Gogh Double Espresso. They have other Van Gogh flavors as well. Enough of this chatter. Let's go ahead and make our drink. So I'm jiggering out 2 ounces of the Van Gogh Double Espresso Vodka into my mixing glass. You'll see I'm using a Boston shaker. That's the mixing glass and the mixing tin. We are doing half of an ounce of the Monin hibiscus syrup. It's really nice. It will add a kind of a rich color that works really well with espresso. And some espresso from my local coffee shop that I just went out and bought. It took a lot for me to not chug this beforehand. It smells great. And we'll just add that directly into the mixing glass. And I have my ice already in the shaker tin part. All right, you heard that? Yep. We're going to give it a nice shake. I always say shake it awake, don't rock it to sleep. You've probably heard me say that before. Shall I? Okay, let's do it. Oh, nothing better than the sound of shaking, right? And if you see me at home, you can see my shaker face. I always love telling people to pay attention to your shaker face and other shaker faces. Well, we all know a martini is traditionally served in a martini glass, but I'm actually not. I'm changing it up. So technically, this is not a martini, okay? But I'm still going to call it my hibiscus espresso martini. You'll see a big rock, a big clear ice cube in an old-fashioned glass or a rocks glass, and I'm just straining that out. Ooh, love that color. It has kind of a hint of magenta and that crema on top. Ooh. Love, love, love. This is some freshly grated nutmeg that I'm just going to add on top. Oh my goodness, guys. Let me just whisper about this for a second. Dad would love the ASMR. This is a delicious... No, I'm not. I just can't. Okay. I smell it and I get that delicious nutmeg, a little hint of coffee. Just going to give it a little bit of a taste, okay? You know, Van Gogh Double Espresso works so well in any espresso martini, really any coffee-based cocktail. And the Monin hibiscus adds this little interesting fruit-forward twist to this drink. And then the nutmeg, it all balances really well together. Well, coffee, I love it. This has been Tipple Time. I'm Jonathan. Thank you so much. Hope to see you again very, very soon. Cheers.
Tipple Time is brought to you in part by Van Gogh Double Espresso Vodka and Monin. That does it for today's show. If you enjoy what we do, please rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. You can also support the show with a small monthly donation to help sustain future episodes. Just click on the donate button at the top of our website and choose your donation amount. To learn more about future guests, visit www.thecocktailgurupodcast.com or follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or TikTok.
The Cocktail Guru podcast is produced by First Reel Entertainment and distributed by EatsDrinksTV, a service of the Center for Culinary Culture, home of the Cocktail Collection, and is available via Anchor, Spotify, Apple, Google, Amazon, and wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.